there's this like a synergy where you're combining two totally different forms of fighting. Am I right?
Like, okay, now it's like, whoa, all right, yeah, like the Jujitsu black belt just automatically kind of trumps everything else.
If you're wrestling with a guy who's high or who's drunk on the ground for like 3 minutes, it's exhausting.
On both. I don't think that you should be a self-defense instructor just because you're a Jiu-Jitsu black belt or just because you're a boxing expert.
If somebody is schooled in the striking part of it, like a seasoned boxer, can they be a threat to somebody who's only trained in Jiu-Jitsu?
They work in some dark areas of the internet and some stuff. They see some nasty things out there. So there's days they just want to come in and train and they walk away, big old smile on their face, but they walk in a completely different person.
Well, welcome. We're back for another episode. Glad you're able to join us. And today, our guest has nearly 30 years of martial arts experience. He's the owner of Stay Safe Martial Arts in Mundelein, Illinois. He's an expert in self-defense training, and we're really excited to speak with him today. This is a topic that I find fascinating. Please welcome David Heineman. David, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
So tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how'd you get started in jiu-jitsu?
Martial arts as a whole, I started when I was about 5. So I've done karate. I did taekwondo for almost 22 years or so. I did wrestling throughout middle school. I skipped high school, but then I did wrestling club in college. My instructor growing up in the ranks was one that really pushed me to train in other systems. So he encouraged me to do boxing, Muay Thai, and so I found a gym that had all those, and they also had jiu-jitsu, but I was in college at the time. I didn't want to go to and from college worrying about jiu-jitsu, coming back, going back to school, going back. So once I graduated in 2013, I started training jiu-jitsu, fell in love with it, and that's probably the primary area that I train in today, though I still do boxing or Muay Thai at least, 2, 3, 4 days a week as well on top of that. So I try to stay active as much as possible between the two.
That's pretty wild because jiu-jitsu is not really like a punching. It's not really related to boxing, right? So I mean, you're there's this like a synergy where you're combining two totally different forms of fighting.
Yes. I've always been in love with the striking, but I noticed just the more fights that we had studied or fights that I had been in, that the ground stuff was just not something that I was super comfortable with. But it was very common. I mean, most fights that you see, somebody gets hands-on. Even if you're a great striker, people get hands-on. And so the jiu-jitsu, I was interested in it. Again, I wish I dabbled with wrestling more, but I've actually wrestled more now that I've done jiu-jitsu. I've gone back to do some more wrestling, but I think grappling is just one of the best things that you can do for self-defense for a wide range of different areas, not discluding striking by any means. But I think there's so much that jiu-jitsu in particular offers: health benefits, mental health, self-defense, just like a fun, good atmosphere that I fell in love with it. And it was nothing around me had that growing up. There was only boxing gyms, Muay Thai gyms, your traditional karate schools. And so when I finally found like a jiu-jitsu school, when they really started kind of popping up, like I wanted to get in on that, and the rest is history.
That's pretty wild. And like, you mentioned the grappling part and how someone's going to get hands on you eventually. If somebody is schooled in the striking part of it, like a seasoned boxer, can they be a threat to somebody who's only trained in jiu-jitsu?
Yes. Yeah. And vice versa. I mean, I think if you're one that's like, oh, I want to be if you're a really good striker, if you're a really good grappler, you're going to handle yourself just fine 99% of street altercations. But if you're trying to be a well-rounded, like, hey, I'm teaching self-defense, you need to be educated on both. I don't think that you should be a self-defense instructor just because you're a jiu-jitsu black belt or just because you're a boxing expert. Because if that's all you train, there's so many other variables that you're just not accounting for. And I know systems, Krav is a big system where a lot of, depending on where you train at, because there are some, more open-minded Krav schools, but some of the more traditional ones wouldn't do a lot of stuff on the ground. because we'll never get on the ground. We're going to finish the fight on our feet. Well, that's not always the reality. So, like, if you're open-minded of, like, yes, I can deal with a lot of situations with my hands and my feet, but if they get hands-on with me, and as I kind of put it, you could be an expert boxer, but a bum off the street could get a lucky punch and knock you out. There's no luck when it comes to grappling. If you're an expert grappler, somebody that has no idea how to grapple, they're never going to be able to out-grapple you, period. There's no way that I've ever seen an experienced person out-grapple a better person. But with striking, you can get lucky with a lucky strike. So that's why I always encourage people, like, you should know how to get hands-on, because if somebody gets hands-on with you and you don't know what to do, that's a terrible place to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really smart that you're able to be schooled on both sides. I think that makes fighting more effective. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So you touched on the health aspects of jujitsu and just martial arts, and I want to get into that a little bit. Like, what kinds of changes have you seen in people's health when they started practicing jujitsu and practicing martial arts?
I'd say the biggest thing is emotional and mental health. You're not going to do jujitsu and get into crazy shape. You'll lose some weight. You're going to get great cardio. You're going to get some strength, but it's not like a muscle building activity per se. But the mental health that you get as a result, like I got some guys that work in some pretty tough law enforcement jobs that will come in on days and, hey man, what's going on? How's your day today? And they're like, nah, it's one of those days. I'm like, all right, let's just do some rounds, and just, they work in some dark areas of the internet and some stuff. They see some nasty things and out there. So those days they just want to come in and train, and they walk away, big old smile on their face, but they walk in a completely different person at the beginning. So just seeing the changes that people will have, or I'll get kids, we actually just had a kid join recently that's like, hey, I hate playing sports. I've never touched a weight in my life. I want to try jiu-jitsu. And 2 days in, he's like, I love this. And he's thriving with it. He loves it. He's a tiny little scrawny kid. But if you saw him in the hallways, he'd be one of those kids that probably wouldn't really talk much. He's pretty kind of shy. You put him on the mat with a bunch of people, he's cracking jokes, he's having a good time, he's opening up a little bit more. So it's kind of just like a good, safe spot for him to train and really kind of be who he wants to be and have a fun time doing an activity where he's also learning how to protect himself, but he's having fun with it. And it's still physical exercise, which I encourage everyone to do. If weightlifting's not your thing, go do jiu-jitsu, go do boxing, go do fun physical activity, have fun with it in a safe environment, where, again, you also get to kind of clear your head in the process.
That's awesome. Do you guys talk about any like lifestyle stuff?
Kind of, a little bit. It depends. I got a wide range of students. We got some younger kids. I've got a lot of law enforcement, so some of them we'll talk with some stuff with. I also, because I'm traveling with a lot of the law enforcement based stuff, like I've got some kids that have been in trouble in school for fighting or something that we've definitely kind of had some heart-to-heart conversations aside, after class with them or a couple of their close teammates or something, and just kind of like set the record straight of like this, a couple of them got into some serious trouble as a result of it. And so having some of those conversations where they kind of have like a wake-up call, and kind of just see what the consequences could be and how the results could differ depending on who it is that they're fighting with that day. And so kind of some of those conversations, like I'm not trying to be a parent to these kids that, the younger ones that I have, but at least someone that's like, if they're having a bad day, if they're having trouble with something, like a good place that we can be like, hey, let's work something out. Let's, you want to talk, let's talk, I guess like more of a mentor. But, as my instructor, I viewed my instructor as like a second father to me. He took me under his wing, and even my jiu-jitsu coach, I view him as like a big brother. So I view all of them as like family to me. And if they got something going on, like I've kind of created that atmosphere where they can come up and chat with me, or if they have questions about something, or if they just need a vent, or like I said, if they just want to come in and like, hey coach, can we just do some hard rounds today? Like I just kind of need to get some stuff out of my head, and I'm not really in the mood to do techniques or something. So kind of creating that atmosphere where people are comfortable to come, and if they're having a bad day, come in, and everyone will kind of joke around, have some fun. And I'm not, if I got people competing or something, that's one thing, but I'm not like trying to make this super strict formal atmosphere where people have to come in. Like, people got full-time jobs, kids have school, relationships, whatever. Like, just come in, have fun, like super informal. Nothing wrong with the formality, because that's where I come from, is very formal gyms, and I'm fine with that. but I also enjoy and appreciate just being able to walk in like, hey, sorry, I'm 10 minutes late. Like, yeah, no problem. Come on, let's train, jump in. And that's kind of like, I kind of like that loose setting with it.
That's great. That's great. I'm sure that benefits the people that attend your classes. You mentioned law enforcement earlier. Can you touch on that a little bit? Do you have a lot of law enforcement officers coming into your classes?
I do. I've probably got close to 10 that train with me on a regular basis. And then I've got a chunk that I train with at other gyms that I'm no longer at those gyms since we opened up our own place. But yeah, no, I've always kind of been close with law enforcement. I've worked with them for years. I don't run law enforcement specific training, but I've been a guest instructor at a lot of those seminars where the guys who are running it know who I am and say, hey, you want to come in and be my guest, help out a little bit, give the cops some input, and again, give them a good reality of like, here's grappling, here's striking, here's self-defense applications. I've got what we kind of call like cop roles with some of the cops that I train with here, where I know they're not there for sport, they're there for taking this and using it in real life scenarios. So I'll grab fake weapons, I'll put my hands over their face, like I'll kind of be a little bit more aggressive with them to kind of give them the reality of like, hey, I'm a bad dude on top of you, clawing at your face, hitting you, like, let's move. We're not trying to do fancy arm bars and stuff. You're trying to get back to a good position. So I kind of work it with cops differently, and give them kind of something that they're going to be using more realistically. Again, if they want to compete or something, sure, we'll give them some of the sports stuff, but I know most of them are there. It's like, I want to go home at the end of the day to my family, and I want to be able to survive when I'm out on the street. So that's kind of how I kind of focus with them a little bit. But
yeah, that's interesting. I used to work in an office where a cop would come in every so often, and we had some really great conversations. And I remember him telling me how there's a lot of wrestling involved in police work. So it's like, it's not those fancy fight scenes you see on TV where it's like a fist fight,
messy.
and you know what I mean? But it's messy. You're on the ground, and he's like, if you're wrestling with a guy who's high or who's drunk on the ground for like 3 minutes, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you're going like full on trying to restrain somebody. Do you think cops get enough training outside of? Really? So they're there to kind of enhance that. Is that what's happening?
And I mean, if you really look at it, most hobbyists will probably train more in a month than most cops will train in a year. I think other than like what they get normally in whatever their academy is, most cops don't train past that. A lot of it's just due to the department or the department paying for it, whatever the case is. So I try, like, at least for the cops that train with me are paying like dirt cheap, like bare minimum just for me to get something out of it, but enough that they can come in and train. But no, cops in general, I think need a trainer. It doesn't just necessarily have to be jiu-jitsu. I think, again, the grappling in general is great because of the fact that, like you said, they're going to get hands-on. It's a lot of wrestling. It's messy. And I think if you're more experienced with violence, you're going to be able to choose when you resort to certain levels of violence. Meaning, if I'm comfortable being hands-on, I'm not going to resort to my firearm. I'm not going to resort to my taser. I'm going to be able to control you hands-on. People that don't know how to fight panic, and they resort to the tools that are designed to help them fight. And so that's where we see kind of like a lot of the bad cop, whatever you want to call it, videos out there. But I think when you see people that know what they're doing in their training, you're less willing or feeling the need to resort to more lethal force, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's great that cops have found that, extra thing to take their self-defense abilities to the next level.
Yeah.
And even just taking control of a situation, which is part of their job that they probably have to do very often.
Some of it's humbling because I know on one level cops are probably hands-on and getting into fights more often than I am. Like, I'm not out in the world, I've been in my fair share of fights. I'm not out there getting into hands-on every day, but I'm training every day. And so you also have cops that I've talked to, like, hey, dude, why don't you come in and train or try out? No, I'm good. In reality, it's like, are you? Like, I know you've been in a lot of situations before, but whenever I have trained with you, you have no idea what to do when somebody gets hands-on with you. Like, you're just trying to hold me down with force, and if I really want to get out of it, I'm going to get out of it. And so I think there's also like that kind of like that disconnect of what they think that they're capable of doing and what they're actually capable of doing, or they maybe have never been in a position where they felt powerless. And I would hope that they never do get into those positions, but if you do, at least then if you have training, you have something that you can use to get you out of those positions as well, or at least you're more comfortable in them.
Yeah. So talk about belt rank. It's a little bit different from some of the other martial arts from what I understand. Like, what's the highest belt rank in jiu-jitsu?
I think it's coral, like the red and white. It's funny, you know, I've got all my like Taekwondo black belts out in the hallway down there. And I always tell people, because I'm a 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo, I'm like a 3rd or 4th degree black belt in Hapkido, and I'm a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And the Jiu-Jitsu black belt is probably the most important one to me. And it's funny because like my family will be like, oh yeah, he's a 5th degree in this and a 3rd degree, and like people that don't know, they're like, oh my god, that's awesome, he's all these black belts. People that do know about martial arts are like, okay, whatever. But if you're like, oh, he's a jiu-jitsu black belt, they're like, oh, like, okay, now it's like,
really?
oh, right, yeah. Like the jiu-jitsu black belt just automatically kind of trumps everything else. So to me, my favorite black belt obviously is my first black belt that I ever received, which was my Taekwondo black belt. Just, you know, as a middle school kid, or I think I got it like end of 8th grade. And so that was like one of my like big moments, right? And then obviously after that, I just didn't care as much. But the jiu-jitsu black belt was a big one for me. And again, like people look at you differently when you walk into a gym and they see you pull out a black belt. They're like, oh crap, this dude knows what he's doing. Maybe today's a little bit different because with all the technology and stuff, people are able to learn jiu-jitsu a lot faster. So there isn't that big of a skill gap as it used to be. But I remember coming up in the ranks and walking into a room and just trying to avoid eye contact with every black belt because I didn't want to have to do like a sparring round with them. It's like, if I don't look at you, you're not going to call me out. And now all of a sudden I became that person, and I can see people purposely trying to avoid eye contact with me because they don't want to do a round with me. And so it's different, but there's a big sign of respect for jiu-jitsu. And most people that I know that also have black belts in like karate or taekwondo will never say it. They'll say, oh, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt, and then like, oh, I've got this amount of years of boxing or wrestling or Krav or whatever. But we all leave like taekwondo, karate, and everything else out of it because most of the time, like, that stuff's not something I'm using in real life altercations compared to some of the other stuff.
Yeah. So as far as the other martial arts go, has jiu-jitsu been the most effective for self-defense? How have the others helped you?
I think if anything, they gave me a good way to just grasp material because I've been doing it for so long. So for me to make slight adjustments to learn how to box or to Thai box or kickbox or to add wrestling, I'm able to pick it up quickly compared to somebody that's had no experience with anything. Again, I've been doing this since I was 5. So even if I'm not using all this stuff, I've been involved with martial arts my entire life. You show me something, give me a little bit, I'm going to catch up on it. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in jiu-jitsu that I can't do just due to the fact of my body style. Either I'm too short, I'm too stocky, I'm not as flexible, stuff like that. But I understand what the movements are, and you give me an hour and I'll be able to rep it out and do pretty well with it. So I think it's helped me in that sense. But other than that, like, the best way to get better at jiu-jitsu is to do jiu-jitsu. Like, there's nothing else that's going to help you improve that other than just repetition within and of itself, other than, I guess, if you come from a wrestling background.
Yeah, it just seems so real life. Like you got the katas with the karate and those different motions and formations that there's a lot of focus on. But
which I loved. And I've loved that stuff. I grew up on the art, and I loved learning the history of it. And again, I was a big, and I still am, like a huge martial arts fan. You show me anything martial arts, even if it's phony in the world of like self-defense, if it's artistic and has a story behind it and is part of the culture, I'm hooked. Like, I want to watch it, I'll learn it. I've had the opportunity to work with some really high-level guys in, Wing Chun or Wushu or Kung Fu and learn some of their traditional forms and stuff, and I loved that growing up. But yeah, in regards to like practicality, what other system are you going to have where somebody's holding you down with all their strength trying to choke you, and you got to stay calm and work out of it, and you may be in that position for 6 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, depending on how long the rounds are. I don't think anything prepares you more for like realistic ground encounters than like jiu-jitsu.
For sure. What kind of people struggle with jujitsu that you've noticed in your school?
I don't think there's any one type that struggles. I think it just kind of depends on that person in particular. I mean, I struggled with stuff for years, and then all of a sudden, like by the time I hit brown belt, stuff clicked, and I'd be like, Coach, why didn't you teach me this stuff earlier? He's like, dude, I've been trying to teach you that since you were white belt. You just never comprehended it. And then there's other stuff like I think the beauty of jiu-jitsu is there's so many techniques out there and there's so many styles out there that you can like make it your own. So I don't think it's that people struggle. I think it's that people find what works for their body, find what works for their game, and they hyper focus on that. And if they don't like something, they're not going to put as much effort into it. So they may struggle in an area, but that doesn't mean that that person or that body type struggles. It's they may just not be interested in it, so they're not really putting all that focus on it. Like leg locks was something that I've never really cared too much about up until recently, and I'm just kind of starting to get into them. But I could have gotten into it years ago. I just never liked dabbling with leg locks, so I just never cared to do so. It doesn't mean I'm bad with leg locks or that I can't do them. It's just I didn't care enough to really put the time and energy into actually learning it.
So your school, like, tell me about it. Is it primarily self-defense focused? Is it, do you focus on form and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we do, I call it striking classes, so it's a mixture of boxing and Muay Thai. So we do striking, we do MMA, and we do Jiu-Jitsu. And those are the only classes I'll teach. I'll run self-defense seminars on occasion. I try and do like a public self-defense class. It's like 2 or 3 hours. I'll try and do one like every other month or so and just like, hey, $20, $40, come in, learn some self-defense for a little bit, and we'll kind of like hyper-focus on, hey, this time we're going to work on fighting on the wall, or how do we get back to our feet, and just give somebody like a hyper-focus on an area to get something. But most of the people that I have that train with me aren't necessarily interested in self-defense. However, what I will do is, within the stuff that I'm teaching, because I have people that are there just to take care of their health, or they just want to be a hobbyist. I have people that are actually trying to make professional fight careers, and then I have like my law enforcement guys. So here's a technique. My MMA guys, here's how I want you to focus on this for if you're fighting in the cage. My hobbyists, just do what I showed you. Cops, here's what I want you to adjust to get ready for being on the street. And so I'll make adjustments, but I'm not going to be like, all right, today we're going to work self-defense. I'm still going to teach you jiu-jitsu, but I'm going to give you different viewpoints on it, just simply depending on what you're there for. So at least I can kind of teach something and I can educate everybody on it, and then they can make slight adjustments within that technique itself.
So talk a little bit about the MMA stuff. So that's a separate like curriculum that you teach?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a mixture of the two. So it's striking added in with the grappling. So we're teaching them essentially how to make that connection from how do we make from the striking, how do we get to the ground, how do we get back to our feet. So it's a nice way of like putting everything together. So again, you talk about jiu-jitsu for self-defense, it's great, but people that only do jiu-jitsu and don't know how to strike, what are you going to do if the guy doesn't want to go to the ground, or if you're not able to get hands-on with them because they're just hitting you the whole time? So, having a good understanding of how to put the two and two together. So we run a couple. We got like our intro class. So for newer guys, we'll work with you on some of the basic fundamentals. How do we set up takedowns? How do we get back to our feet? How do we work on the wall? Then we also have on Friday nights, we've got our fight team that comes in. So we got another coach that runs that. And so he's got a bunch of his fighters. Some are pros, some are amateurs, some are just up and coming. And so that's a little bit of a more higher tier level of training, but it's still the same thing. I'm piecing together everything from striking, grappling, putting it together, and giving you practicality. So again, people that are wanting to do self-defense, I tell you, find a gym that offers striking, that offers MMA, and offers jiu-jitsu, and train in those three areas. If you can train in those three, you're going to be fine on the street. Obviously, there's always holes in every system. There's always stuff that isn't going to work in every system. No system is perfect. And then there's also like the actual self-defense elements. How many people are involved? Where are you at? Do you know how to de-escalate situations? Are there weapons involved? Do you have a weapon? All those things come into play. But no, I think with like self-defense as a whole, like combat sports, in my opinion, is like the best thing to have for self-defense, but you have to take into account actual self-defense variables. And our goal at the end of the day is to not fight. So if I can avoid the fight, I'm not trying to prove that I'm a fighter. I'm training because I like to train, and I'm hoping that if I do find myself in a situation, I can hopefully handle it fine. but I know from training how bad fighting is, so I don't want to do that in the street. It sucks when you get hit with a pad in the face by accident, or when somebody hits you a little too hard. Why do I want to do that with bare knuckles on the street where somebody's going to continuously do that over and over again? So I think that's where it's like the self-defense elements. It's like some people just don't, they let their ego jump in, and I think people need to kind of really look at the big picture of like, what is self-defense actually?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the guys with the guys pursuing fight careers that, that you've had come into your classes, they usually have some kind of martial arts training that steers them in that direction, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of them, I think the guys that I have personally all came from wrestling backgrounds.
Wrestling, really?
Yeah.
I would have thought like karate or taekwondo or something.
They've only wrestled and boxed their whole life. Like just grappled, struck, boxing, Muay Thai. We added in Jujitsu with them, and now they're doing the MMA. I've got another guy who is at one of the gyms that I train at, and he started during COVID, never played a sport in his life. Started Jiu-Jitsu, now he's competing in MMA. He's got like a 9-4 record. Never did any sports before. So and all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I'm a fight. So like some people, and the best part is most of those guys are like the scrawny, nerdy people that you would never expect to go into it. And they're just like one day, like, yeah, I'm gonna go fight, and then all of a sudden they just thrive in it.
Yeah, so. MMA just seems so hardcore. Like, I don't follow it closely, but you're just applying so many principles because, like you say, there's the striking element, there's the grappling element. It just looks so intense. Like that must take superior athleticism to be able to do that successfully.
If you really want to be good at it, you have to be good at both, because there are people that are really good strikers and they're okay on grappling, but they can get by enough to do well in MMA, and vice versa. Guys that are really good grapplers and they're okay enough in striking. The guys that are like the goats of the sport are great in both disciplines and they know how to put it together very well. So like if you can be a well-rounded martial artist, if you can really hone in on your craft, yeah, you're going to go pretty far in that sport.
Yeah. So I want to talk about like the application level here of what you teach. Like anybody who's listening to this right now or watching this, like how can someone assess like potential threats in their daily lives? Do you teach that, like just situational awareness?
Yeah, when we do any of the self-defense seminars, I usually spend like the first hour and we just kind of talk about dealing with people that you don't know. So like that unknown contact, right? Somebody that's a stranger. And the hard part is like if you were growing up and your parents said, hey, you got to watch out for strangers or who like bad people are, everyone has like, oh, bad people dress like this, they're going to look like this, they smell this way, they're rude, whatever. But that's not true anymore. A lot of bad people could be the nicest people in the world. So it's a little bit trickier now. So now it's like what actually is that picture of like a bad person? And now it's kind of just more of like what's their behavior? Not necessarily what they look like, but like what is their behavior doing? Are they following us? Are they not getting the hint? Are they talking to us more than we want to talk to them? Are they nervous around us? Are their hands constantly in their pockets? Those are the behaviors that we're kind of looking for when you're out in public of like what doesn't fit. Or what's the car that doesn't fit in the parking lot? What's the person that doesn't fit in this atmosphere? And again, that doesn't mean that we're judging people or we're being discriminatory by any means. It's if we're trying to be like aware, you have to find what doesn't fit or what's sticking out to you, and that's what we start kind of paying attention to and make adjustments. Again, we could be wrong, and that's completely fine. And just because I see something or see someone that doesn't fit in, again, doesn't make me discriminatory by any means. It's just like based off of where I'm at, you don't look like you belong here, so I'm going to keep my distance from you. Or kids, come here, we're going to keep our distance from this person, even if they look like they're the nicest person in the world. But just given our area, it's like, it's just like if you live in a small town and somebody comes in as a tourist, like, yeah, you're not from here, are you? And you can easily see who sticks out. It's the same thing, right? And so that's kind of like one way to do with it. Others like trusting your gut. Something feels off, react to it. And I think the biggest thing is people kind of throw the word like be situational aware, like that's going to save everything. And it's situational awareness is, in my opinion, is paying attention to what doesn't belong, what doesn't fit, what feels off, anything along those lines, and then we make adjustments based off of that. So if that means I put my stuff down and we leave, if that means we change directions, if that means I go and I notify somebody from the store do I call my wife or your husband or, whoever you need to call to be like, hey, I need you to come to get me or something? Like it's situation awareness is seeing something that's off, but then taking an action based off of what it is that we're seeing. And I think that's where people kind of is like, oh, well, I saw the dude following me in the parking lot. Well, what'd you do? Well, nothing, but I saw him following me, and so I just kept my eyes on him. It's like, well, you should make adjustments. Maybe don't go back to your car. Go back into the store and wait a little bit, or ask somebody to escort you to your car, or call the police or something.
Yeah.
Like that, in my opinion, is what situational awareness is actually trying to have us do. Is like, you saw something, now
Right.
do something about it. And that doesn't mean run up and talk to the person or engage with the person, but you have to take action to keep yourself safe, if that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you find yourself constantly assessing, like when you're out in public?
More and more, yeah. Especially nowadays. I think definitely during COVID, it's definitely been a little bit more hyper since then, just because I feel like that was kind of like the turning point for a lot of people, just kind of going crazy. And I think we've seen a lot more violence since COVID had hit. And so pretty much ever since then, like I started carrying, I never carried until COVID. I've started taking a lot more hyper-focused self-defense classes since then, and kind of really getting into some extensive training. I've met some great instructors and friends along the way, but I've definitely upped my training a lot more. I've made, my family and my wife, everyone a little bit more hyper-focused on stuff. Or if I see something that like happened, even though they hate me sending it to them, it's like, hey, here's what happened at a park today or whatever, and like, oh, I hate when you send me this stuff. It's like, yeah, but I want you to know that this is what's happening. And I've got, countless videos on my phone of fights and attacks and shootings and stabbings that we see online. One, because you see what's going on out in the world, but it's to study. Like, I can see what the behavior is leading up to it, depending on what the video is, but a lot of times you can see what's the physical behavior, what's their demeanor, how did the attacks happen, what's happening in those attacks, and that's how we can start kind of creating those curriculums. Or if people are like, oh, well, that would never happen in real situations, like, well, here's half a dozen videos of this exact thing happening, so let's just talk about how we deal with it. Because I can tell you the self-defense that I was teaching and stuff before has drastically changed since COVID, since I've actually taken a big effort into studying violence. The way that I approach teaching has definitely changed in that sense. But yeah, I find myself not over the top hyper. I'm not paranoid by any means, but I'm definitely more aware of what's going on, and I'm definitely got a smarter head on my shoulders that, like, if we see something that feels off, we're getting out of there. I'm not dilly-dallying around. I'm not sitting there to take pictures. It's drop yourself, let's go. Because I know where things can go, and I'm not sitting around to wait for that.
Have you ever assessed something situationally where your instincts were right and somebody was a problem, or there was a potential threat?
Not in that sense. Maybe it might just be more of like a fun thing. My buddy and I were in college, and I don't remember what we were doing, but we were outside of the bar, but like across the street, and we had seen like some ruckus coming out, and we kind of saw like this drunk girl, and I'm like, this girl's causing trouble of something. Like, we just knew that there's something was about to happen. We got that vibe, so we kind of like put ourselves even farther away because we knew. And sure enough, she got into a car, pulled a quick U-turn, and crashed into another car, and then up on the curb and almost took out a crowd of people because she was intoxicated. And I was like, that was a good call. Like, we saw something was off, and we just kind of like, let's kind of move away from this just a little bit, but not in the sense of like, oh, this dude's about to attack somebody, or this dude's about to happen. I've seen like arguments, and I'll be like, hey, we're not like, if you had asked me 5 years ago, like if I saw people arguing in a store, it's like, yeah, let's see what happens from this. Now it's like, if I hear people screaming at each other, like, let's go.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't want to wait to see what happens. I don't care what happens. Like, my responsibility is myself and you. Let's go.
Yeah, no, that's smart. My wife mentions this a lot, and I think of it too. But even when we're in stores we frequent, we always think, if something crazy goes down, where are the exits? So it's always knowing,
Right.
like, always having that plan in the back of your head if something happens, and just having that spidey sense, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and we've talked about like having like code words or something where like if we're out in public and I say water bottle, whatever your code word is, no question, like, we're out. I saw something, or you saw something that made you just extremely uncomfortable, or you're getting a bad vibe about. It's like, no question, we're out of there. Either if we're in the middle of shopping, put your stuff down and leave, like that type thing. Or if we're in the middle of dinner, like, money on the table, we walk out. So, there's really no question on that. So we'll kind of go to that extreme if we have to, but, fortunately we never have. But those are also some things that we'll do as well. And then, like, my hyper focus on stuff has also kind of carried over onto my wife a little bit more as well, to where now she's starting to pay attention to exits, or if people are not, like, oh, this person was kind of giving me the bad vibe, or this person doesn't really fit in a little bit, just paying a little bit more attention to that type of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. What are like some things people can look at if they're trying to get into some kind of self-defense, or they're considering learning more? What can you recommend to them as a starting point?
As like a system to train, or like videos to watch?
I mean, whatever. Yeah. I mean, probably a system to train. I mean, videos you can pull up. There's tons of stuff online. But...
yeah, you can pull up just about anything. I mean, there's tons of instructions out there. I would say for like a system, I would start with Jujitsu, honestly. Because honestly, most people, when I get asked questions about fighting, it always will come down to, well, what do you do if somebody's holding you down? What do you do if somebody's choking you up against the wall? What do you do if it's somebody's bigger or stronger than you and they're holding on to you? I never get asked a question of, well, what happens if somebody punches you in the face? It's always that they're holding on to you. So, and then when we do teach us stuff, they're like, well, you're a strong person, even though you're shorter than them, you're stronger than them. It's like, trust me, I've gone against guys that have 100 plus pounds on me, and I can still get out of the techniques. The techniques work. Size difference is going to play a huge variable. If you're 100 pounds and somebody 250 is holding you down, good luck.
Yeah.
That's a very tough situation to be in. But if you train in a grappling system, you're going to learn how to stay calm, which I think is the biggest benefit that Jiu-Jitsu has, is you're going to find yourself in a lot of uncomfortable positions. So learning how to be able to breathe and stay calm with somebody bigger and stronger sitting on top of you or holding you down is a huge thing that people kind of underestimate for self-defense. And then obviously from there, you learn how to use your body, learn how to use your size against somebody bigger, you learn how to use your strength against somebody stronger. And I think that goes a long way. Then from there, like, I'll tell people to get into striking, because again, I think you need to train in both. But I think if you're willing to spend some time and learn, go in Jiu-Jitsu. If you want like a quick self-defense program, do some striking, do boxing, do Muay Thai. Like that, again, will get you far. And then once you start training, take some of these high-level seminars. Take some of these seminars that are 2-3 days, that are high intensity, that are going to definitely get you emotional and push you in some very tough kind of mental, physical, and emotional tests that are going to kind of really let you see how you do in real-life encounters in a safe environment. And I think if people are that worried about protecting themselves that they're carrying a firearm or they're carrying knives or pepper spray or anything, you should know how to fight. You should take the time to learn how to fight, because that should be your first line of defense before anything else.
You mentioned remaining calm in situations. How hard is that to teach? Obviously, I'm guessing confidence is a component of that, being schooled in jiu-jitsu and knowing that stuff. But like, how do you teach somebody to stay calm when...
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. I think that's probably I think that's definitely one of the things that's like, you're only going to learn it by getting put in that position time and time again in a safe environment. You got to trust your training partners to let up when you need them to let up. But I think it's just the idea, like, okay, somebody's on top of me, my face is getting smashed, I feel all this pressure, I can't breathe, but I'm okay. And I think that just comes with time. Now, if you do like some of the high-intensity self-defense seminars that are out there, like Craig Douglas runs a great one from ShivWorks, and his are like 20-plus hour courses with a live training at the end where it's like full contacts, people are screaming in your face, there's training weapons involved. People get extremely emotional over it, because now not only are they uncomfortable physically, but now they're uncomfortable emotionally, and that adds a whole nother toll to it. Because again, even in jiu-jitsu, you're not necessarily going to be emotional in jiu-jitsu, you're going to be uncomfortable physically. You take out the fun aspect of that, and now your emotions kicking in. So like, how do we train that emotional part safely? Well, you got to have good training partners or good coaches that know how to kind of trigger those emotions to some extent, so that you can learn how to cope with them in real life scenarios. So like when we run our self-defense classes, I try to kind of get people as close to that line of reality as possible, to where they're going to get a bit emotional, but it gives them a good headspace of like, this is what it's going to feel like on all levels when somebody's actually in front of you trying to hurt you, or trying to hurt your kids or your loved ones. but we're in a safe environment. So it's okay to be emotional here because we're going to learn how to get out of it. And we're going to keep doing this until you get more and more comfortable with it. And then we're going to do it again tomorrow. And then again the next day. And it's just, that slow process of we're just going to keep edging you closer and closer. That's the best way that I've kind of seen it done. But it's not something that's like, oh, I've taken jiu-jitsu for a month, I'm going to be fine. Because even now, I'll get in positions where I'm like, I'm not uncomfortable, but I'm like, this just sucks.
Yeah.
And I got to figure this out. But if I panicked, which I used to do, it would be a lot worse.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that's a huge thing with cops, too. Just because they're in those panic situations all the time.
That's the other thing is... And it's funny because, like I said, like when I do, like I call them cop rolls. So like when I roll with some of the cops, I'll get on top of them and they're kind of just, oh, okay. And they're just kind of going through the motions. And then all of a sudden I'll just kind of take my hand and I'll put it over their mouth. And I'm like, if you don't get me off of you, you're not going to go home to your kids tonight. And all of a sudden you'll just see like a switch flip. And all of a sudden, like I'm on my back, they're on top. And like sometimes I have to trigger that in them to be like, hey, remember why you're here. Don't get lazy with this. Understand that if you're not getting out of this position, you're not going home tonight. Mm-hmm. And when they kind of get that emotional realization, then they're like, oh shit, I need to step up and actually do this. And you'll definitely see a kind of a difference, but they'll still find themselves uncomfortable. Because again, in their heads, if they've never been in those positions in the world, they think they can handle those situations just fine until somebody smaller than them even is holding them down, and they're like, how is this smaller person keeping me from getting back to my feet? Like, well, this is why we train it. So that's why I keep telling like cops that I see, I'm like, come and train. Seriously, you need to come and train, because what you think you're capable of is going to be different than what you're actually capable of until you physically go through it and see it for yourself.
Yeah. What's the youngest age you start training people?
We just started a kids program, so I've got four years and up.
Really? And so what are some of the fundamentals for kids when they get in there?
So the kids is the one that I'm kind of hyper focusing a little bit more on the self-defense aspect. I've got, like my 10 to 13, 14-year-olds, I'm giving them a little bit more of the sport, still the self-defense, but now that I can actually give them a little bit more of the sport application. The kids, it's like, hey, well, let's work on breaking, if somebody comes up and grabs your wrist, let's work on breaking free from those wrist grabs and stuff, because yes, that still applies in sport, but it's great for self-defense. And it gives them like a small task that they can kind of focus on. So we're kind of teaching them self-defense first, while slowly introducing the sport of jiu-jitsu into it. So they still have fun with it, but the parents are looking at it, and as I explained to the parents, like, I'm teaching your kids how to protect themselves first and foremost. I don't care about, little Bobby winning at a tournament. I want to make sure little Bobby doesn't get in trouble at school or doesn't get thrown into a locker room and just beat by a bunch of bigger kids. I want to make sure he's okay. So that's my primary focus, but if they want to compete, we'll also get them there. So they're going to get both, but in the kids' eyes, they're just learning jiu-jitsu. I'm kind of strong holding the self-defense a little bit more. And then as they get older, they're going to really pick up on the sport aspect of it. I also don't need 4-year-olds smacking arm bars and everything right out of the gate either on each other too. So
yeah, they got time for that, right? That's for your adult classes.
Exactly.
Have you ever had any youths abuse the skills you have? You said you had that experience that before.
Yeah, so
really?
I had one kid that he's back with me now. He did a couple fights under us, so we trained him. They did a couple jiu-jitsu matches, and then they kind of had like a time period where they didn't have anything to train for. So they were just training to train, which as an athlete myself, I understand that sometimes that gets you a little bit mentally, where it's like you're constantly prepping for a tournament or a fight, and then when you don't have anything, it's like, well, why am I training? And so he kind of stopped training for almost a year. He was gone for like a year, just kind of disappeared. And his uncle, his cousin trains with me, so his cousin's dad had reached out, so his uncle, I said, hey, I just want to let you know, he got into some trouble at school for beating up a kid. And he's like, so we want him to come back and train. And I was like, well, how bad did he beat up the kid? They're like, well, he's potentially looking at jail time for it. Like, just started hanging out with the wrong crowd, young kid, and just kind of got lost. Didn't really find the right path. And so, again, I waited like a month or so before I finally kind of brought him back in, and we put him into sparring that day. And I talked to his dad and his uncle and said, here's how we're going to handle it. And we put him back into sparring. I brought in some bigger guys and more experienced guys, and we sparred for about an hour. And he got pieced up pretty good from all the guys. And you could kind of tell he knew that it was coming. And it's not that we beat him up, but we're putting him in a situation. It's like, look, you just beat this out of a kid at school because he called you the wrong name or looked at you the wrong way. Well, here's a bunch of dudes that'll fight you any day of the week. And they're bigger than you, and they're stronger than you. So what happens if that kid fought back or you picked on the wrong kid? I'm like, this is how it would turn out, but without gloves and without a safe environment. And we kind of had the heart-to-heart. So he kind of felt the weight of that a bit, and he's been back with us now about a year and a half now that he's been back with us, and he's doing phenomenal. And he's one that you could really see like he's kind of found his path again. And he knows the type of person he is. He's still kind of dealing with the repercussions from that fight a little bit. He got expelled. So he's still kind of dealing with it. And I remind him on a regular basis of, anytime I'm like, hey, any update on this or that? And he tells me, I'm like, well, whether it goes that way or this way, I'm like, look what could have happened. He's like, I know. And so I think that rather than me kicking him out, if I kicked him out, I feel like he would have just gone right back, and it would have just gotten a lot worse. And so I think by us bringing him in and kind of putting him in his place a little bit and making him realize the reality of like how bad fighting can get, that seemed to kind of put him down a pedestal a little bit, because he's a super talented kid also. And so we're like, why don't we put all that anger and rage into your training? Let's funnel it in a positive way, and let's get you some fights. Let's get you some training. And now he's working, he's going to finish up school, and he wants to follow in his cousin's footsteps and become they're both working to become pro fighters. And so that's kind of what they pretty much work all day and they train at night, and that's all they do. And that's all they want to do. And so I'm like, why don't you just follow in their footsteps? I'm like, you have a bad day. I'm like, you got your cousins, you got your uncles, they all train with me. I'm like, call any of us. We'll come in, we'll hold pads for you, we'll train with you, we'll get, whatever's bothering you, get it off your chest, get it out of your head. And so he's been the only one that I've had that's really kind of gone through some stuff. But everyone kind of, all his coaches, training partners, family, all kind of put him in his place, but also welcomed him back. And we've kind of given him a safe place to train. And again, I think if I had kind of kicked him to the curb, that would have turned out a lot worse. Now, that being said, if I have a kid that I know is just going out there starting, then I'm not going to tolerate that whatsoever. I think this was kind of a different circumstance just based off of, young kid getting lost, not a bully per se.
Yeah, so. No, that's great that you're doing that. I think young kids need somebody like you to be that positive influence in their lives, especially when they're getting lost in those wrong crowds. So that's great, right, man. I really love the work that you're doing, David. It's awesome. Can you tell people how to find you?
Yeah, so you can find David Heineman on all social media or Stay Safe Martial Arts. One of the two should pop up. Everything, Instagram and YouTube is mostly where you'll kind of see us active. Instagram, you're going to see kind of like a lot of just short, quick tips, tricks, tutorials, self-defense. We'll throw in some fight stuff as well. YouTube is obviously going to be longer form, so I may show you a 30-second technique on Instagram, and we're going to turn that into a 10-minute video on YouTube. So we'll kind of go a little bit more depth with the YouTube. We do a lot of the fight breakdowns. We'll do product reviews. We'll test out self-defense products for you. And then, we're starting to dabble a little bit more with like personal safety as well, parent safety for their kids, and kind of broadening the range of just, rather than just hyper-focus on self-defense, all the elements of like what self-defense entails. Like, as you said, how do we talk out of situations? How do we avoid the fight? What are some things that we look for? Like, how can we branch that out more than what it is initially?
That's great. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And thanks for hanging out with us today, man. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. So we're out of here, guys. Thanks for watching another episode. Thanks for listening. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can always check us out at mikecpodcast.com. And we would love to hear from you in the comments. So have you ever been in a situation where you had to use your self-defense training, or have you ever been threatened? Like, let us know. Drop us a comment. We love hearing from you guys. And until next time, thanks, guys. See ya.
The Mike C. Podcast.